My name is Arturo Diaz, and I'm a member of SEIU Local 721 in Los Angeles, worker, LA County employee for 3 years. This was my second convention that I've been to, and I don't mind saying that I don't have the labor history background, okay? And I got talked into becoming a steward in my local, and I went in as the vast of members do, just a fly on the wall, very intimidated, very naive, and I probably still am, not intimidated though, about speaking, and I just started to pay attention. Started going, this is always volunteer, started going to a lot of meetings, started a lot of information about what's going on, and started saying, where does this not make sense for me? And that's when I'm focusing on asking the questions that I, over time, got progressively more reactions from the people I was asking the questions of. And I started out, these are the people I'm going to learn from. This is where about how I can protect myself and my fellow members that we're not taken advantage of in our work sites. So gotten to the place that I was coaxed further into becoming it, and I went to Puerto Rico, and I was totally flabbergasted, was shocked. I couldn't believe the control that SEI had over all of the proceedings that took place there. Well, in my opinion now, after having gone to Denver, SEIU controlled about 90% of the activities in Puerto Rico. This time, SEIU controlled 99% of everything that was going on. It's outrageous again. It confirmed for me what my research and my paying attention to what's going on dictated to me, and that's that SEIU is a down corporate model style of management. The members don't matter to them. The only thing that matters are their dues, and they go after that vociferously. They'll turn over in to try to find some worker that they can say, we're going to help, we're going to protect you, we're going to get you in the union, we're going to get your respect, and as soon as they get you in the union, that's the last time you see them. It's what I did this time was I was on the resolutions and the amendments because we here in California, well, especially in 7, I'm sure this feeling is shared throughout the state, we're really upset and hammered hard by this that took place, and it happened in the same fashion as looking at some of the verbiage in these resolutions come to pass in the near future. It was, they called it in 2004, it was in 2004, and then they started moving on it in 2008, called it a possible realignment of jurisdictions, and turned out to be was a forced merger on a great many of us here in California. Some of our locals were operating quite well, doing good things for ourselves, but we were told at conventions that we were supposed to reach out and work more strongly together. And I thought at the time, well, we do that as separate locals. Why do we have to be merged? And what I found out in my research is that, particularly in the LA area, we were merged with that were on the brink of financial. And then it dawned on me, oh my goodness, instead of having 3 or 4 different, or in my particular 7 different presidents to have to deal with 7 digits, and possibly 4 or 5 of them going bankrupt, SEIU missing out on dues, no, let's work together. We only have 1 president to have to work with. And then they can put all their funds together, and it doesn't matter who pays what as long as SEIU gets money. And that's what has happened. So I still haven't gotten over that. We've got locals, legacy locals. None of them are happy except for the people that are in power, and they're not really representing their legacy locals because they make all the decisions. Transparency that's supposed to be guaranteed us in the Constitution is not there. It's like a ghost. In my former local, we used to have budget committee meetings and started getting pretty good. I'm not an accountant, but I started getting good at drilling into what are these expenditures. Tell me exactly who got paid, what was the company, for what purpose was money used. That doesn't happen anymore. So there now that I can figure out, initially they told us when we were all merged that because of the size, complexity of all the 6 different legacy locals coming together, it just was too much for any group of people to handle, and particularly if you weren't professionals, it was only being done by 3 or 4 people on staff. And that happened for a number of years before they finally started saying, well, maybe we can have a budget committee, but the budget committee that they put together only will move money around when any line item has gone over budget. So we haven't really gotten down to where the money's going. Our particular local generates $5 million in dues per month, and there's only 4 people making the decision on where all that money goes. So I went to Denver thinking, okay, well, let's see what they're going to do this time, because I know how they operate. It's to protect themselves. 99% control, and they're talking about we're the 99%, and they had the nerve to have Anna Berger and Andy Stern in the audience stand up and pause. I'm thinking, wait a minute, isn't this the guy, Andy Stern, Wall Street Journal reported gets paid a pension from SEIU of $250,000 a year, and he's of the 99%? I don't think so. That's hypocrisy number one as soon as we got there. So from there, it was a rally, not a convention. The way that they controlled us is that a lot of us didn't get there until after the festivities had already started. They had the resolution committees meeting on a Sunday, starting at 1 o'clock. The vast majority of us didn't get into Denver until 2 o'clock, and some didn't get in until late Sunday night or early Monday morning. So how could we, any opposition to any of the resolutions or constitutional amendments that were going to be voted upon at this convention if we weren't allowed the opportunity to discuss them? As usual, they wait until the last minute to even offer us an idea of what those resolutions and constitutional amendments might be by making these things available to us about a week before we got there. But of course, there was the proviso, this is all draft language. You had to wait until you, on the day that you checked in, to verify that it was the same language that you were looking at. You start off like that in the hole, and it's only get worse, because what I saw in Puerto Rico, and again this time in Denver, is that they have so many that are so happy to be away from home. It's like a lot of young kids, and someone else paying for them to be there. This is their very first convention, so they're so excited about what, yeah, Rob, whatever it is, yes. And that's the climate, that's the environment in which we were having to think about what is this stuff, this language that we're going to be asked to vote on, and can we understand what this stuff is? We had 36 amendments and resolutions, 18 of which were submitted by the International Executive Board. I could go on a whole tangent there for about an hour on what is the IEB. They're a clandestine, as far as I'm concerned, group of people that do not publish minutes, do not indicate anywhere on the SEIU's website what activities are or what they do, where they meet, and the only thing that we're aware of is that some of them get a whole bunch of money, and the rest of them, the local that they're outstationed at, either controlling those locals or strongly influencing what happens at those locals. Some of the payroll of the international on the LM2 reports, the vast majority of them are on the payrolls of the individual locals that in them. So even though SEIU did, to me, was surprising in Puerto Rico, saying that all future IEB meetings, any costs associated with the representation of those locals showing up to those meetings, paid by the locals, that was a shock to me, because I'm going, international had been obligated to pay for that stuff before, but oh, okay, so now I get it. Now that's more of a burden, it's the cost and the burden onto the employees back locals. So going off on the tangent, sorry about that. The 18 amendments and resolutions International Executive Board submitted, of course, all got passed. No rejections, okay? There were 18 resolutions submitted by locals, and surprisingly, 8 of them passed. 10, of course, were rejected outright. in my opinion, the best ones were rejected outright. The letter there submitted by 721, I feel pretty confident in suggesting that there isn't any one member that has the capability of writing this stuff up. I don't know where they got the information from. I don't know who got the idea to write them. I'm wondering if any of the other, I know 10 to 1 did a great job on preparing all of their resolution submission. 7 to 1, someone had to have supplied 7 to 1 that information for them to write up the resolution and submit them. Somebody trying to make points for the president of our local, President Bob Schoonover. Not one of my favorite people. He was one of the people on the resolutions committee. At the end of the resolutions committee, because I got there real late, I asked him to help me understand what was one of the items that was included in the language on one of the resolutions. He said he had no idea. Now this is after the resolution committee is over. He's on the committee, and he didn't think to ask for an explanation of what the acronym meant. He's just going to vote yes. And I took notice of him on that resolution committee for the short period of time I was there. He looked totally disinterested the whole time, as did quite a number of the other members on that resolutions committee. So it's like decisions had already been made. If the IEB submitted them, then for sure we're going for them. They're going to be approved. If other than the IEB submitted them, then we'll have to decide whether this is good for the international or not. If there's any question at all, just reject. So I really appreciated what co-member here, Ed, did. He challenged them to go ahead and report out over something that they didn't even want to discuss. So that took like 2 minutes, but part of how SEIU controls what happens at those conventions is that we normally report at 9 a.m. at the convention. We're all sitting in chairs, and the votes on resolutions and constitutional amendments happened about 4 o'clock each day. So you've been sitting there all day, and you're thinking, well, this is someplace I've never been in my life. I wonder what it's like out there. I wonder what it is to walk around downtown. Everybody's ready to just say, let's just go. So, oh, by the way, before you go, as a group, we're going to vote on 10 resolutions. Can we go ahead and put a general motion to just approve all 10 right now? It only took about 3 minutes. 10 different resolutions on 10 different subjects. Very intricate, the language on some of them, the complexity. No problem. 2 minutes, everybody, yay, SEIU, yay, and we're done. That's the way this stuff happens. And what happened with that jurisdictional realignment, we all ended up being, well, 721 was severely impacted, much to my displeasure, and there's a number of items now in these new resolutions that I think are scary, and I just hope that everybody's going to be on the lookout for them. Be caught by surprise that I was able to get to the mic because of the experience I had had in Puerto Rico. I was up there on about 5 or 6 different occasions in Puerto Rico, and each time I was either at the mic or I was the next one to get on the mic when all of a sudden they would call for the question. So I only got to speak once in Puerto Rico. This time, it looked like the same thing was going to happen because the way they would group the resolutions and amendments, you could go to the mic and they would say, no, not yet. And I would say, well, I'm going to wait for the next one. I've got all my pamphlets, so whichever one it is, I want to be next. No, you can't stand here. Go back to your seat. And so then when they would flash up on the screen what was the resolutions we were going to talk about, I was almost running to get to the back to the mic, and then there'd be 3 people already there, and I would be the 4th. So if you've got 4 or 6 mics, that means 24 people are going to go around before you get a chance to speak. And what everybody was interested in doing was, let's get out of here. So when you start to talk, they just want to get up and say, hi, everybody, hi, Mom, SEIU rocks. And then you get 10 of those in a row, and then you get one person that talks about one of the 8 resolutions for consideration, and then someone calls for the question. So what happened was really fortunate, and I think it was because Mary Kay was trying to set herself up to be well received for this acclamation vote for becoming reelected as president. She actually said, Do we have an opposition opinion? Because we've heard nothing but pro opinions. And I happened to be the 5th one in line, and they went to all the mics and finally came back to me, and I still had my hand raised, and they said, let him speak. And what I found out afterwards was that 4 people were running to the mics behind me from my local to say, call for the question, call for the question. But I got the chance to speak. And so when I voiced my disagreement, or at least requested that everybody think about what they were voting on, and it had to do with all of us going back to our locals to press our pension boards to loan money to California for infrastructure projects because it's going to put workers back to work. I just thought, you know what, that's our pension money. The people that control our pension money are, all these years, have chosen on different occasions to not loan money to the employer, much less to the state of California. There has to be some reason why they did that. Where is the analysis of how this will work? Show us the success stories. There isn't any data like that out there, and there's this little prepositional phrase buried deep in one of the resolutions that we will aggressively go back to our locals and convince our pension boards to invest in infrastructure projects. And it sounds like, okay, but after having suffered through these mergers, and it was the same they would be loaning money to the state of California to invest in infrastructure projects, which would be building new roads, repairing old bridges, whatever they would come up with, but that stuff would all be contracted out. What is the guarantee that any of those would be union jobs? There's no guarantee. Who are the experts in all our different pension boards? You'd have to hire somebody, and then it's hiring somebody to hire somebody to hire somebody. There's no precedent for it here in the United States. No one is doing this yet, but SEIU wants to get the pat on the back from the president to say, well, the Republicans have blocked me, but SEIU is doing it for me, thank you guys. But what about us if we lose our money, if we don't get a good return on those investment dollars? So I got up to say that, and of course that ended the conversation because call for the question was right after I made my statement. And of course, everybody's trying to get out of there. So there was no discussion about the 7 other resolutions, just everybody yay or nay all at once. And of course, it was all yes. So that night at her reception, because Mary Kay had a reception for being elected through acclamation, against my better judgment, I went. But she was there, and I thought, you know what, this is a great opportunity for me. Let me go thank her for recognizing an opposing viewpoint, and I'll put on my best smile and just shake her hand, and that's what I did. Said, maybe tomorrow now, because we're being friendly towards each other, she'll allow another opposing viewpoint. But heck no. The following day, I don't think any conversation went more than 12 minutes. The first day, there were a few that went 18 to 20, but the following day, everybody was, no, I think the sooner we vote on this stuff, the sooner we get out of here. So no, we don't need long conversations. And the resolutions and amendments that were being discussed were always prefaced with 4 or 5 people saying, SEIU, they're great. And they would tell a personal story, a testimony, so Mary Kay's up there just going, okay, I'll humor them, I'll let them say their thing, and then there would be no discussion of any of the resolutions, not even pro. And it would be call for the question, hurry up, call for the question. It's just outrageous.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Brad mentioned, I'm a member of, we represent about 95,000 throughout the state. And I wanted to be a delegate to the last convention in Denver, actually my 4th one, so I'm a little bit, actually very familiar with SEI conventions as they go. First of all, though, I do want to thank everybody for joining us here today. For a lot of working people, weekends are very, very precious. Oops, sorry. For some of us, it's the only downtime we have, so it's always nice weekend with us. And I do want to thank my co-panelists as well, Arturo, who drove from Los Angeles. I had a long drive down here, then I realized Art drove a bit longer than I did. So I appreciate that, Art. Now, going back again to the convention, as I mentioned, fourth one. My first one was in Pittsburgh, and fairly young back then, relatively naive at the time. So, and the next one was in San Francisco. The third was in Puerto Rico, most recent one in Denver. And I do want to echo what I mentioned earlier. The stated purpose of this convention was our union fighting for the 99%. Which, if you think about it, I mean, that's essentially what unions are for. We're an association of members actively to try to secure decent benefits. But like the theme of the convention masks a disturbing trend within SEIU and more potential. And part of that is, sum it up in one phrase, they telling us to think outside the box. And that's sort of how they justify a lot of these efforts to try to turn into labor management type committees, labor type agreements where many of our members were sort of losing our focus as an organ. Our basic duty is to the members, and our basic duty is to safeguard their. So while it's very helpful to engage management in a lot of different creative, that's one thing that we have to be very careful about, is as we think outside the box, we don't lose sight of what's inside the box, right? There were a couple that stood out for me at the convention. One of the initiatives that the International wants to involve itself with, this idea that the problem is so large, we basically can't do it on our own. Within the labor movement itself, we're just not big enough to deal with this big problem. So one of the initiatives from the International is the idea that we want to reach out to other community allies, community organizations, which I wholly support. I think it's a great idea. In fact, all along. The one thing that struck me there was a resolution introduced by Close Back East, and the resolution called for SEIU to reaffiliate itself with the AFL-CIO. For some of you who might not be familiar with it, in 2005, SEIU and a number of other large Teamsters, I think the UFCW, and a number of other ones, split off and essentially formed their own federation. The stated argument for this, that the AFL has kind of lost focus on Oregon and has become more of a political machine. I believe the issue really has to do with control. It's a split. Number one, probably whatever they're paying to the AFL-CIO. And again, it boils to control. Unfortunately, the change federation, or change to which is what they called it, basically fizzled. And as far as I know, it's really not doing anything right now. And with the magnitude of the problem that we're facing, I think the spirit of the resolution was, if a lot of people in this fight, it seems natural that before we start reaching out to national allies in the labor movement, I think it's a great idea that we actually start reaching out to our own sisters in the rest of the labor movement. Resolution never got on the floor. In case you're not familiar with it, the SEIU has this really strange rule. And the rule is the committees that review each resolution, they have a number of options. So they can look at a resolution, recommendation to support it. They can issue a recommendation to reject it. They can merge it with other resolutions. But one strange option they have is they have not even report it out to the convention. If you can think of an example of something democratic, that's the most undemocratic example I can think of. The point of these committees is they're supposed to be a smaller body that have a little bit more time to look at the issue. And then, so to be given the option not to even report, I think it's a disservice. Actually, it's, I think, to the delegates. Because essentially you have appointed by the international president that's deciding that issue is really not important enough for the delegates to even talk about. So that one was one thing that really frustrated me. I got up on the mic to try to move a motion to compel the committee to report it. It was resoundingly rejected, of course. To me, I think it's the best illustration of sort of the schizophrenia we have in the international. When publicly we're preaching out about reaching out to the community and other allies. At the same time, our own natural allies in the labor movement, we turn a blind. So that's the first issue. The other issue has to do with that SEIU has. For example, we have initiatives in a lot of states, especially Florida, fighting efforts to try to disenfranchise, removing voters from the voter rolls. Difficult for members to be able to vote by requiring that they provide education. And again, I wholeheart those fights. I mean, I think the idea should be that it should be as easy as possible for the electorate to voice heard. Now, in SEI, we do the opposite. The convention is perfect. The way we vote, no secret ballot when we're electing officers. When we vote, it's done on the floor, done by each delegation. And essentially, the convention is when someone is nominated, the head of your delegation comes to you and says, how do you want to vote? And for many of you that are from the local delegates are elected, that local is also very undemocratic. Right? A lot of the problem with international conventions is delegates tend to really not have a very good grasp of what the issues are we're going to deal with at the convention. At the local level, most of the time, the way you nominate delegates, limit the amount of time you vote for delegates. Ironically, my local is one of the few exceptionally have a 1-month balloting period that's done by mail. And that's why it's the member turnout is very, very low. At most, we have 10% of our members voting in all of them. And with the amount of time they have available, the privacy of the mail ballot, it's an environment to really make your voice heard. Other locals, same luxury. Some of the voting in one day for a few hours in selected work sites. So again, that limits for people to participate, and it really makes it for regular members to be able to voice their delegates. So I think those really stood out at the convention. Now, don't have any illusion about how these conventions work. Again, this is my 4th one. So I do know there's a little bit of a pony show, that's expected at these events. Over the last 3 or 4 conventions I've attended, it hasn't improved at all. It actually got worse. The dog and pony show got longer, it got fancier. The real business of the members, where we vote on real things that really, none of that happens. There was no election. So the only drama during the election was when we were voting for members of the International Executive Board. There were 2 people, regular, non-affiliated delegates that were nominated. One was Moses Essien from my local 1000. The other one, I don't remember the name of the other female delegate, but what I found out later was she misunderstood the number of positions that were being nominated for. And she apparently was under the impression that there were 2 positions where there were no nominations already made, which made me chuckle because the International will never make that mistake. So when she realized that there was no vacancy and that we will actually have elections, she decided to withdraw. Moses stayed on. And the one thing that really stood out for me too is during one of the breaks I was approached by one of the guests. We had a guest section in the back. It was a wife, I think, of one of the delegates, or I think she was actually the wife of one of the local officers. And she was just describing how flabbergasted they were in the guest area about how this whole proceedings was going. I mean, they were just shocked that, that we have an election process where basically nobody else is running, for the most part. So when Moses was nominated, we heard back from some of these guests saying, well, finally now at least we get to vote for somebody, instead of them just being, how elections are supposed to work, right? The other thing too that's very frustrating is, the whole convention was an utter waste of energy, time, and money, and things that we don't have a whole lot of, right? If you look at these handouts here, one of the reasons you normally try to make them glossy and slick is you want people to read them, right? That's what sales brochures are for. The problem is, in the international, we don't have any culture of actually wanting people to read stuff. So like Brad said, we got it when we sat down at the tables. The committee meetings, the real chance where you get to actually read the stuff, talk to folks that will be looking at them, they were held the morning when most delegates are flying into Denver. So fortunately in our local, we have a little bit of autonomy in our local chapter. So my chapter voted to send 3 of our delegates a day before. Because we know we've been through this before. So he said, we want to make sure we're there when the meetings are happening. And it was so sad because on 3 of the committees that I went to, the Rules Committee, the Credentials Committee, and the Resolutions Committee, well, the Resolutions Committee had a lot of people in it. But the Rules and Credentials Committee, there were 2 people, 2 delegates that were there. And the committee meeting was held in this cavernous room that can accommodate probably up to almost 150 people. So they spent all this money to go through the motions of saying, yeah, we have a democratic process in place. Delegates can, but they don't, again, without that culture of really wanting members to be involved, that's what's missing in SEIU. So that's why it's a show. It's a dog and pony show. It's a corporate model where you have a package, make it sound really nice and pretty, and I think it's a big disservice to our members. The worst thing we could do to members is make them think that they actually make a difference. The other thing that really upsets me is a lot of these folks that get up on the podium and pontificate about our struggles, real struggles by working people, are people making over $200,000. They're not struggling. They're not worrying about having to pay their rent, having to worry about child care. And that's really, again, very, very frustrating. On the final item, the budget. SEIU's budget is over $200 million a year, I think. So.
Is that everything or just the international?
That's the international. That's just the international. That's not including the local. Over $200 million a year. So when you get the Secretary-Treasurer's report, it's what, 15, 20 pages? And out of those 15, 20 pages, there's about 2 or 3 pages that have numbers. 2 or 3 pages that have numbers, right? And
Can you see that budget again?
it's over $200 million.
200
Million, yeah,
a year?
a year.
So the locals give that to the international?
That's part of the per capita payments that each local pay, part of your dues money that you pay international. Yes. So that money helps run the international, and when you get to the convention, you wonder, well, what is it being spent on that's really benefiting us? And it's very hard when you come out of the convention to really connect the two. When they say where the rubber hits the road, there's no connection at all in there when you get out of the convention. They're totally, it's like they're in a bubble basically. So it's disconcerting to see those folks again talk about us. Really, we really have no business talking about us. They just have, they're just totally detached. One point that's been made, don't get me wrong, I like Sal, and Sal, is very progressive. But, the one thing people don't realize is Sal went along with a lot of this stuff that the international was pushing.
Sal, I know a lot people
Yeah.
in that whole
Yeah.
movement, and, you know, I don't like to say, oh, it's just Sal, and great
Yeah.
leaders up there, and
Yeah,
Sal didn't
there's,
get along.
there's a bunch, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of it is, you know, and maybe part of the reason they went along with a lot of it is they probably thought that it was a great idea at the time. But I think that's why it's important for regular members really to start that effort locally just to start talking about reform. Heard what, I haven't seen the memo yet, but Kirk Adams, the executive vice president in charge of the healthcare sector, put out a memo, I guess, in response to that issue. It was vaguely worded, but it said something about it's important that all the local leaders are on the same page. So I guess they recognized that that created some friction. But just going back to what Art said about the flyering, the one thing I forgot to mention to Art was on the day he was flyering, I was on my way to go inside the convention because I was trying to get my hands on the packet. There were 3 people with radios behind the door. You didn't see them, but they were intently observing what you were doing. And then on the day we were nominating for the officers, I got this really bright yellow flyer, and it said, vote for so-and-so for president and secretary-treasurer. I said, oh my God, an organized slate running opposite of the incumbents. So I kept reading it and said, okay, so who are these people? I'm going to try to find them. And it turned out they were from Canada. They're local members from Canada, but they were running for some other position in Canada. So I said, oh, well, there you go. For a bright moment there, I thought we were going to have a real election with an organized, group running against the incumbents, but it didn't pan out. But going to what Mike asked about, so I think the only realization that most of us got was really the change must happen at the local level. There is no way you could do it at international. In the amount of time that we need, it has to happen locally. So, so if you have any like-minded folks that have the same concerns about what they're seeing, I think that's, and it'll be great if it could start from a local like W, because it's huge. 32BJ is the one. They were the ones that 32BJ was shouting down a request for some of the locals to vote, to have extended time for voting, because they were rushing it. It was the order of business that day, and they were trying to rush it. 32BJ in unison said, no, just close the polls. So if you could start reform in one of these big locals, that could start, the process for us. But at the international level, after 4 conventions, like Mike said, it's the same. I think part of it too is the dynamic for that issue in 2008. It didn't have a deep enough genesis in really trying to create a culture of a democratic movement. The issue in UHW really at the end of the day had to do with issue about control. And sprinkled in there was issues about member democracy and what have you. But really at the end of the day, you've got 2 big opposing groups that just didn't see eye to eye. But I don't think the main root of that dispute really had to do with reforming the organization.
Member of UHW, I'm in the home care division, and we're also members of a caucus within UHW, been mostly based in home care. We have friends in the different 3 divisions. It's called Members Power. We're one of the sponsors. Also, United Public Workers for Action is a co. And then we would also like to thank SMART, the International SEIU member activists for Reform Today for this event. Let me just apologize that we don't have more of our member power members here. We just have been through a big fight. Members have been in Sacramento. You may have seen us at the Capitol building, 15 days getting arrested and working to stop the cut. We've been fighting against our good friend Jerry, than with our friend Jerry Brown, who has 3 times introduced cut. which have been removed and now new cuts, but some of the former cuts still stands. I feel that this convention had a major message that I think that is not really fact, but rather public relations. And that's seeing the bags and the materials, the 99% is something in a very strong way. And the theme is a strategic alliance with social groups, community. But I think that ends up masking a turn towards labor management partners by SEIU. And I mean, that's reflected in our local in a number of ways we'll talk about later. This is the theme, and I will hope that SEIU as a country will use of the convention against the kinds of things that are coming down in the labor management. Instead of the labor community that implies is happening, but we should, I believe, a goal that tended to be used as a cover for the opposite, the main thing that I experienced at the convention. So it wouldn't have taken much to distribute to the locals across the country to have a real discussion about them in a rank and file situation. But there's none of that takes place. In the Bay Area, Mary Kay Henry came and there was a day and she took testimony from members that allegedly was used in the compilation of the International Executive Board resolutions. But so we're handed booklets of resolutions that then are amended, so you've got to scramble to figure out how they're being grouped as they're announced from the podium to be discussed once you're there. It was crazy. And they're grouped in rather odd combinations, like one group, 5 resolutions was going to be discussed together. And all of these discussions were to take place in 40-minute time periods. But it ended up that we never even halfway through, because after people talked about how wonderful SEIU is and the resolution grouping would be really important, very vague, nothing specific. The times used up, they had 1 or 2 opposition people. After that, no more room was allowed because the rest of the microphones were mobbed by sort of cheating type people. And then they called the question at the UHW home care. Our president was sitting, one of the alleged neutral mic monitors who aired into central control somewhere came up to Dave Regan, president of UHW, and said, could we get a person to call the question? And 2 people who weren't paying attention, wanted to speak, and they were like rushed to the top. I tried 3 times and could not get up. And no, I was speaking for an amendment. I would oppose without an amendment and would possibly vote for this amendment, and they wouldn't put me to the front. And they were considering having other voices, and there had only been 1 other negative person. So it's a case of, these people to close the question, they're rushed to the front of the line, they get to close the question. Most of the periods were 20 minutes or less. So that was kind of surprising. But the resolutions are not put out. We get them as we arrive in the convention center when they've been available the whole time. And as Arturo said, and Ed, the resolutions committee had already bundled them in a group, but that's not posted anywhere. You have to scramble 5 booklets and figure out whether it's the amended or the original version, which ones is going to be the big up. So, I mean, I went up when I knew the next thing was coming and asked, and identified myself and said I want to talk on 3. And they acknowledged me, and then there was some other more fluff stuff. I mean, the whole morning on the first day was used for, all kinds of alliance and other, work being done around the nation and stuff. So I sat down for a while. When I turned, when I thought it was about to come up, I looked back and it was packed. I went up and said, remember me, I'm the guy that came right after the last resolution was taken care of. And they said, well, these people are here now before you. And I couldn't speak 3 times I tried. But I would like to point out that in the first day of the actual convention were the divisions, and UHW and the home care division, so maybe the other speaker relate on theirs. But one of the key things facing the healthcare division was the Affordable Care Act question that was coming up. And they kept saying, oh, we'll get to that, we'll get to that, we'll get to that. Well, they never got to that discussion at all. They did not want to hear from the division on whatever's thought, you know, how we respond to and go forward, depending on the Supreme Court decision. So there was no chance from the floor on that. Let's see. It ends up there was this control that's also been discussed. UHW is not particularly a paragon of democracy. Our executive board meetings in some way are more democracy surprising. I was really surprised at the state of the international, the way it stands right now. You know, and the convention is not cheap. This convention, I passed around the only 2 pages of the budget, very general terms, were published, but you can see in 2008 it was over $13 million, which would be 15% of UHW's whole budget, one of the larger unions of the international. And you know, and there may be other figures that just included in that 1 year. That was for the 2008 convention. Let's see. As far as the nomination for international officers, there was a resolution that 1021 had passed calling for rank-and-file people across the country to elect our international officers. And that didn't even make it to the resolutions committee. It was withdrawn, unfortunately. But,
Withdrawn or not?
well, not submitted. We're still waiting to hear the inside story on that. So if anybody knows, maybe in the discussion we can go over that. So all the offices we voted for the president, you know, and well, actually, I forget the order, but for the higher offices, and they were all acclamation. President, the Secretary Treasurer, then the International Executive Vice Presidents. These are all there's 6 of them, officers that are on the international payroll. And then the next category of the International Executive Board members are the vice presidents, who basically just have that term, but they're a lot of local presidents and officers and whatnot. You know, and the vast majority of all these people are staff. They're not actually up from the rank members that have gone up, but are the sort of staff type officers that we know all too well in many of our locals out here. And then finally, the International Executive Board. Now, in that vote, people from the floor were offered for the convention. Everybody else was acclamation, you know, and they did the whole rah-rah with balloon, well, I don't know, they had summons, but, you know, the confetti and a pure demonstration, like you see when you're a kid and you watch the party conventions. That was sort of part of the coronation hoopla that went on for a while, you know, the spontaneous demonstrations that ain't so spontaneous. But then we got to the International Executive Board members, who were the lowest category on the International Executive Board. And a sister offered herself into nomination, and Local 1000, maybe Ed can talk about that in the discussion, offered somebody. So then we actually chanced the vote. Everybody else was just declared by acclamation. And they were all part of Team Henry, quote unquote. So the sort of pre-made list of candidates, and they were unopposed. And it was really, I mean, I was really jolted about that. I had heard that there was movement for Jerry Hudson, who is one of the International Executive Vice Presidents from 1199E, and I think in these times had an article about him, and he neither denied nor confirmed that he was running. So there was a bit of a buzz for a while, but in the end, talking with people from 1199, they said that, well, he didn't want to disrupt the unity of SEIU for supporting Obama in 2012. So he withdrew or confirmed that he wasn't a candidate. No, they were all Jerry K. Henry's selection of candidates. So there was one slate. It was Team Henry.
But no one was running against them, so it's not really a slate.
Yeah.
Well, it's
So at the convention we had these 2 options. Now the sister withdrew her name because they were made it sound like we'd be there all night just to count, you know, for 2 people. But then it was very illustrative to have the brother from Wisconsin be entered and to be considered for one of the 37 International Executive Board category of the International Executive Board when there's, I think, 71 members on it. So all the rest of them were all like hand-picked people. And I know in my caucus in UHW, the vote was, we were supposed to have 158 delegates, and it was 107 to 1 for this brother. What the other? Oh, so you know, we got the discussions about the labor community aspect and strategic alliance. There were different committees working on that, and for my perspective, one of the most interesting, after the convention was over, they were still continuing with experiences from around the world. And there was a sister, a bank worker from Brazil, who was active in the Party Trabalhador, the PT, the Workers' Party of Brazil. And she told the story of Brazil as a movement that was working to do what we are allegedly doing, is putting together a huge coalition. But part of the component of that whole story is that from the get-go, they were building a labor party. It wasn't an afterthought. It was part of the story. And if people were following Brazil in the late 80s and 90s, I mean, it was something that was growing. And, you know, there was no automatic thing there. It was like a struggle of labor building a political voice and a political role within the arena to put forward labor's politics. Don't just rely on the liberals of Brazil, or, you know, obviously the conservatives are going to be worse, to put forward your voice. That's crazy. You know, why would they do that? So it was really illustrative. So that whole lesson of the Brazilians that was quite wonderfully presented, you know, was completely ignored as an experience by the political line of supporting our friends politically. They were called the supporters of the 99%, is what we're doing. Therefore, we, of course, the International had already endorsed Obama last year, but this specific call to support the friends of the 99%, you know, instead of building the voice of the 99%. And one thing I had problem with, the whole theme of the convention was lead, fight, win, unite for the 99%. It's like substituting ourselves for the 99%. It's not being the 99%, you know. It's like SEIU, what's in my bag? It's for, it's the wrong preposition. You know, it's not building a voice for the 99%, which is my perspective. I think we really need to raise that, especially as public workers, which a lot of SEIU locals are, is that we have to get out there and offer to working people in this country, if we're even going to defend our own interests, a line that raises what we need to survive, as well as the rest of society, as public workers and as citizens. We cannot rely on either liberal or conservative bosses, parties, to put forward our agenda. And we've seen this again and again. Home care, for instance. You know, we've been fighting our friend Jerry Brown. Usually you don't have to fight your friends. They're usually on your side. But, you know, three times home care has had to beat back the budget cuts. So we don't have any new ones, but we've got the old ones still to deal with. This is a great victory, according to our local.
SEIU has a different definition of friend.
Right. There are billions of dollars in cuts in this current budget. I mean, it's not
right. Right. Yeah. So that would be my perspective. That is absolutely necessary. And it, you know, if you take the theme, the line of this convention for real, and not just as a propaganda mask for the substance of aligning with bosses. As we in UHW, we're still trying to have the discussion about our alliance with the Alliance for Jobs and Sustainable Growth in the city, which is the Chamber of Commerce political entity that we're allied with, rather than the community, the labor community that's fighting against this alliance. So In one way, the theme of the convention should be held, I think, against the leadership in reality and said, you know, you are not following in reality what this convention is promising to the members of standing with the 99% and fighting the bosses. You're in a political alliance with the bosses. And, you know, and also in San Francisco, members may be aware, we are putting forward as a union a candidate who has the program of the Alliance for Jobs and Sustainable Growth, but is a labor face, unfortunately. But this is the reality that seems to be encouraged. And we can't forget that Mary Kay Henry of the Henry team, one of her tasks that she was given by Andy Stern was to organize the trusteeship of UHW, you know, and went up there. And our current president was a former international vice president, Dave Regan, because he's now a local president. He can no longer serve both posts as one of the 6 international executive vice presidents. So he's moved down to, was Tom Woodruff, who's top of my favorite person's list, because he was the patron of Dave Regan. But he showed how in 76, we had the White House. We had overwhelming majorities in the Congress. And he showed how we got absolutely nothing. Nothing. It was the ideal situation, veto-proof Senate, all that stuff. You know, and that is the point. We need to have our own voice out there. And we need to not rely on the friends of labor to speak for us. We have to organize, you know, and I think that's so important for SEIU SMART members across the international to get together and share the experiences in their locals and, you know, and stand up with each other. You know, we may not be able to change the 2016 convention, but I think we need to turn the heat up a whole lot and stop the kind of baloney that's happening from happening without a lot of scandal and outrage, like the brother's saying.
Hearing you people say is basically the same thing at each of the 4 conventions. So that's insanity to think you're going to change things and wait for the next, make a plan for the next convention. You're wasting your time. My wife, she was a union activist in Solano County, SEIU. And she was one smart, she still is a smart cookie. She's a former Bolt Law School graduate. She's an attorney. She's also a therapist, and that's what she was doing up in Solano County. You couldn't have gotten a better person to be in there as a shop steward in that. And her total frustration with trying to be a shop steward was that the organization itself was worthless. Worthless. And so she did what she could. During the period of time she was there, they came up with the call to wait. You got a problem? Call 800 such and such and talk with somebody in Wisconsin. Hey, I was a chief steward for 12 years. You don't do that to your members. I mean, that's ridiculous. Okay, here's what we're looking at. When Walker in Wisconsin, a radical state, when he said the state will stop collecting union dues for the Ask Me people that work for the state, they lost over 50% of their membership. They didn't pay. And you know why they didn't pay? Because of the same things we're talking about here. Ask Me wasn't servicing them. SEIU is not servicing its members. So, okay, California, we got Brown. And in Wisconsin, they got Walker. But it's like a virus. And more states that get these kinds of rules put in are going to do the same thing. And all it takes is one guy like Walker, and you lose 50% of your members, and that means 50% less money is going to Washington, D.C., to the international. And before long, you don't have any money. You don't have any power. You don't have any union. And the people that are still around that are paying dues, that money is going to do precisely what it's doing now. It's going to finance guys like Andy Stern and this guy that just gave up and asked me. These guys were flying around in private jets on our money. We're over there talking in the streets about the 1%, and we're not talking about these bastards that are stealing our money. They're stealing. I can say it right now. They are stealing our money, and I've never looked at the books, and I know they're stealing our money. And nobody's mad about it. And you get told in your SEIU, well, Here's an 800 number. You got a problem, sister? Call up Washington. That's the same thing that the post office does. When you got a problem with the post office, you're not getting mail anymore. You can't call the local post office. You got to call Washington, D.C. How do you feel about that? And then you don't like the post office anymore. When they start talking about closing it down, you don't care. And it's going to be the same thing that's going to happen with unions. Our days are numbered. And they're numbered. And when you've got an organization like SEIU and ASCME, two of the largest unions in the United States, and every time you turn around, you hear some union official getting up and saying, we gave this away, we gave that away, and they're bragging about it. If you look at what happened in Wisconsin, and there's plenty on YouTube, and one after another, but this is before the major sit-down that took place. Before it took place in the Capitol. One union president after another asked me, SEIU, Teamsters, we gave them this. It's on YouTube. We gave them that. I don't understand. We gave them everything, and now they want to take our right to go to the table.
I'd like to comment on what Charles said there, because I think he kind of hit the nail on the head there. It happened in Australia when the conservative government there took over. Basically, they put a change in the law where you can't have a closed shop. So what happened was the unions had no choice. They had to work their ass off to get members to voluntarily join. And this happened, I think, in 07 or 08, or probably earlier. And I haven't followed it since then, but, you know, I mean, it helped.
They said it actually made them go out and meet their members.
Which is what they're supposed to be doing. But, you know, I mean, I don't want to see it, but it's the same discussion we have internally in our local about, you know, every union has this problem where we think we're doing our best to communicate with members about why things are important, but they don't get engaged, right? And when we were having the issue about potential for getting paid minimum wage, there were a lot of us saying, you know, that may be what it takes, is when we start getting paid minimum wage, when people start realizing that, you know, there is a need for a union. But here it'll be the opposite for the organization. You know, if we do lose that right to, you know, collect dues through payroll deduction, I mean, I don't want to see it, but the one silver lining in it might be that's the wake-up call that unions need. For us to realize that you can't just rely on politicians, you know, negotiating agreements to let you do it. You have to work hard for it. But like I said, yeah, I don't think we have any plans for the next convention right now. I mean, we have to do it locally. Otherwise, the window is closing shut very quickly. And I think we've got maybe a couple of years, if not less. It's sort of a vicious cycle, you know, that's the way you change it is. But I think the message at the end is you can't really do changes at an international level, but you can forget it. It's a utter waste of time. I think the only change that can come from within SEIU is you have to do it, start locally first. Start with your local, and the larger the local is, the more rumbling you can start. But really, unless the locals are reformed, nothing's going to happen at the international level. It's just, yeah.
His pet projects is setting up Republican Party PAC for and, you know, and giving to support the better Republicans. You know, at the pre-convention discussion, I asked Mary Kay Henry that we should take a position in SEIU that we give at least 20% of our political money to putting our politics in the arena, our line. A real single-payer call, a real defense of public sector workers. Not like Dave Reagan echoing the garbage of the bosses about how we all have to sacrifice stupid stuff. I mean, he said that with the attack on the nurses and the ratios. So she said, well, we won't go that far, you know, but we do want to support the future. But, you know, supposedly broke off to Change to Win because we were putting 20% into organizing. We need to be organizing politically. And at least 20%. I think it should be 100%. and stop wasting money on these lousy bosses candidates. So I would hope that, at least that we take up that at least 20%, I think that's something that we could raise the issue with members in SEIU. And I hope that in SMART we'll have that, that discussion. Do look up reformseiu.com, join SMART, and let's keep the discussion going. It's really important that we share each other's experiences and give each other strength, because we do feel isolated sometimes when we're in separate locals, to know that there are people across the state and the international that are co-thinkers and co-workers that have had it with the garbage that we've been dished. And I think we can make a difference locally, and we can raise the heat internationally and put the issue on the table for all of our brothers and sisters across SEIU.